This may come as a surprise, but I really like Gothic horror when it is done well. G'day mates and fellow adventurers, my name is Mordecai. My first exposure as a young chap to the Gothic horror genre was actually a demo of the original Diablo that came on a disc full of other demos for PC video games. And I really liked the aesthetic that was on display, that omnipresent sense of dread that it conjured up. No, not Diablo 4. Never Diablo 4. Although, 4's art style does convey the Gothic horror roots of the franchise, which is the only credit I will give Diablo 4. Regardless, the demo for Diablo did contain the Butcher, which scared Kid Mordecai senseless. I didn't get to play Diablo any further after taking down the Butcher, as that was where the demo ended, which is unfortunate since looking back in retrospect, I feel I would have liked that game thoroughly. I point to Diablo because it encapsulates everything I like about Gothic horror. Dark fantasy creatures such as demons rising from beneath the earth, that iconic curved foreboding architecture, the gloomy atmosphere meant to drain all semblance of hope, and other aspects such as particularly dark themery, whilst remaining approachable. And mates, the Curse of Strahd module as written for D&D seems to perfectly encapsulate everything I thematically like about Gothic horror. My own checklist for whether or not I'm going to like someone's particular vision for Gothic horror is actually fairly straightforward. Adherence to the central ideas for the theme, and not having some crippling problem that wrecks everything. So, naturally, the particular story I have uncovered for this discussion features a DM who completely misunderstands what Gothic horror is supposed to be. Let us embark into the walkabout territories known as r/RPGHorrorStories. The story we're recounting the tale of today is titled DM Acts Like a Mean Girl, instead of just saying that I'm not a good fit for their campaign, and is written by Reddit user Curse of Bonero 7. And before we actually begin, I have to give a content warning for suggestions of a rather disgusting non-consensual intimate act. Earlier this year, I was supposed to play in a campaign of Curse of Strahd, if the username was any indication. However, some drama got in the way of that, and in hindsight, it's pretty funny. So here I am, to regale you the tale of how and why I didn't get to play Curse of Strahd. Before we embark on our journey, here are some names for our players. DM, the Dungeon Master. Barb, short for Barbarian. Me and her played in a previous campaign together before. This information is important. Art, short for Artificer. Another player who told me some additional details after the fact. And Fiend. Although not a player, but he was still in the D&D server in question, and happened to hear some rather choice tidbits from the DM. In the beginning, all was well. I was one of the first people DM asked to join his campaign. I hadn't played D&D since a previous group had fallen apart, so getting to play again was exciting. And it was Gothic horror? Hell yeah, sign me up for that! I was all ready and had the perfect character for the game, an Oathbreaker paladin with an obsession with dark magic. I was so hyped to play her. However, before we even get to the character sheets, the DM sent all of us players consent forms. Now, I'm totally cool with consent forms, especially for something dark and gritty like Curse of Strahd. The first issue was that this consent form had stuff on it that was not Curse of Strahd specific in terms of content warnings. It was more of a general form that just had most, if not all, of the uncomfortable topics you could run into in a campaign. So, not exactly a great start, but okay. The DM had mentioned wanting to play this accurately, and that this was not going to be a game for the faint of heart. That's fine. I love a spot of guts and gore in my Gothic horror. One of our other unnamed players dropped after hearing about how gritty and edgy this Curse of Strahd campaign was going to be, and honestly, more power to her. This also meant that we had 4 players instead of 5, which was okay in my opinion, but the DM really wanted a party of 5. Again, also not a problem. But then I get a message from DM, "Hey, can I add Barb in? Like, would you be comfy with that?" See, Barb and I had something of a history, as I alluded to previously. So of course, my silly goofiness goes, "Yeah, sure, I don't see the issue." Because I was a massive people pleaser at the time. I am still trying to break that habit, unfortunately. In reality, there was an issue. I hadn't spoken to Barb since our old group had dissolved, and all the drama that came with it. That's a different story though. In short, I was scared Barb hated me because we did not leave off on good terms. Oh well, I could play with her in a campaign. It's fine. Everything is fine. Another red flag in hindsight came in the form of the DM saying that there would be no leniency for my mental health getting in the way of sessions, and that they won't be pausing to let me decompress if I get overwhelmed. That's fine. I'm not expecting to be accommodated in every game I play in. I'll just have to deal with it. This is fine. Everything is fine. Or so I foolishly believed. They did repeat this boundary of theirs multiple times to me, saying that they won't stop for me and that I'll have to manage, which I found a bit weird. But I know I can be forgetful at the best of times, so I figured the repetition was so I didn't forget by game time. Oh yeah, did I mention that we hadn't even started the campaign yet? No? Well, the campaign never starts, if you wanted an indication as to where this was going. The third strike was when I got a message from the DM. Hey, are you sure you're gonna be okay in Strahd? Yeah, well, why wouldn't I be? Well, some players are worried about you. They don't think you'll be able to handle it. No, I'm pretty sure I'll be fine. I know what I'm getting into. By the way, who was worried? Oh, sweet Saluna above, this was the worst thing to say. Anyway, the DM then replied with this perler of a response. I can't say that. Side note, they said it like they were under some non-existent non-disclosure agreement. I don't remember the exact words, but I do remember getting anxious and pestering them about it. To be fair, if it was another player that had the issue, I'd like to talk it out with them. Let them know I'm going to be okay, so we don't go into the game on awkward footing. Eventually DM confessed that it was Barb who was concerned, and they were even so gracious as to offer to mediate the conversation while Barb and I sort out our campaign concerns with each other. I should note that I thought at the time that the issue was that I wouldn't be able to handle the content of the campaign. I only have a couple of shquicks, remember this for later, so it should be no problem. And I said as much in the group chat DM made for Barb and I. The content was not the problem. Now, while I can't recite the whole rant Barb went on for guideline's sake, I can give you lovely readers the skinny of it. In short, Barb basically said how much of a terrible player in person I was, how I hogged the spotlight, and how I couldn't handle our previous campaign, let alone Curse of Strahd. And also, she didn't want to see me ruin this game too, or hurt her friends any further. The friends in question are our mutual friends. Friends that I am still good friends with today, believe it or not. It was bad, to say the least. Though, luckily for me, the mental preparation for the campaign came in handy after all. I managed to stay calm enough to defend myself from the bad player allegations, and was able to tell her to screw up in regards to the previous campaign that fell apart. However, my strength didn't last long. I asked the DM in direct messages if they thought I would last. I got the most plastic polite "no sorry" I have ever read, and decided to drop out of the campaign, too tired of this nonsense to care about what I was missing out on. That's it, that's the end, right? But wait, there's more! There's still 2 whole characters to introduce. So some time passes and I'm recounting the above to some friends, Art and Fiend, and the 2 of them joined in with some details I hadn't known before. Art was another player and they told me that the DM had, around the time they messaged me strike free, asked them if I would last a session, DM's words. They later informed me that DM had asked all of the players that question, and that the DM had pressured Barb into her insane rant in my general directions. Holy heck. If they didn't want me as a player, is that so unnecessarily complex of a request? What a way to make a worse situation by trying to avoid a mildly uncomfortable chat. Then Fiend chimed in, and oh boy, remember when I said I only had a couple of shquicks? Well, one of those squeamish sticking points of mine is discussions of, good lord, the implications of that are outright
disgusting!
Okay, so now we have to have the talk on why what the DM tried to pull off doesn't just outright violate my checklist for Gothic Horror, but also completely undermines the point of the DM using those consent forms that they did earlier in the story. For anyone who wants to skip this part, here's a timestamp to click ahead to. And for anyone else curious, no, consent forms are not a feature at most tables. Mates, here be the talk on consent forms. One of my personal pet peeves is when a jumbuck decides to violate consent. The entire point of a consent form on paper is, perhaps shockingly, to establish what kinds of explicit or adult content are not okay for the DM and players to have as part of the game. In other words, for the players to give the DM consent on particular topics. If you, as the DM, feel the need to use consent forms to find out what your players are comfortable with instead of doing a session 0, you have documented what your players' comfort zones are and can easily adhere to them. Now, you can ask your players to step outside of their comfort zones, but only up to a point. And whilst you can theoretically within limits try to push those boundaries, you need to make sure that the players are okay with that first and foremost. That's why you have the consent forms in the first place, right mate? You have to be a rather special kind of deranged jumbuck to believe that a signed consent form gives you permission to violate your players. They are not meant to be some document that you get players to sign for the DM to then retroactively add additional non-consensual nonsense to after being signed. Don't even get me started on the DM wanting to accurately portray Curse of Strahd when they have chosen to include additional stuff that Curse of Strahd doesn't even touch on in the book. The fact that the DM then mandated that his quote good ending unquote required at least one of the players to do something that the Galar knew ahead of time as a result of the consent forms was not okay isn't just a problem that cripples Gothic Horror. It is a problem that obliterates any goodwill the DM might have had to begin with, on top of destroying the actual game. The fact that the DM resorted to social manipulation to pressure a player out of the game, instead of being upfront with them about what their vision of the campaign was going to involve, regardless of their answers on the consent sheet, tells us that this jumbuck knew full well that they were in the wrong. And really, I would argue that game destruction is a preferable outcome to having consent violated. That's all I have to say, mates. Let's go walkabout into the rest of this story. Then there was this plan to kill my character. Less a plan and more of an expectation that my PC would die. Fiend explained that this optional murder house side quest was going to stress test the team, and pick off the weak players. One of which was predicted to be my paladin. The DM thought my PC would have been too stupid to survive, based on some jokes I'd made about her previously. DM, as far as I could tell, just didn't like my choice of PC, and instead of talking to me about it like a normal human being, devised a stress test quest to kill my character off and force me to use a backup character. It is worth mentioning that the DM, after I told them that I was dropping Curse of Strahd, did offer to run a one-on-one game for me, as consolation. I turned that down too. Anyway, that's the end for reals. Thank you for reading. In summary, my dungeon master refused to communicate with me normally, and instead opted to play social circle chess to oust me from their campaign. And that's how the tale concludes. Let's get the Loxodon in the room out of the way. Normally, I at least try to understand why bad players have engaged in bad player behaviour. Sometimes it's because they're seeking some form of validation through their bad actions. Other times, the actual reason, if there is one, is much more sinister, complicated, or outright disgusting. This case is one of the few exceptions where I don't feel inclined to try and understand the underlying, twisted, and possibly psychotic nonsense. Instead, let's go over the reasons why what the DM did here was not just wrong, but outright vile. If the DM was genuinely concerned about a specific player's mental health, then they should be prepared to, actually accommodate for that. I don't know what Barb's beef with the poster was, however, it was clearly enough that the DM latched onto that, and instead of actually trying to get the situation resolved, went fishing for a reason to boot OP. This DM resorted to social manipulation to boot a person that he, and at most one other player, didn't like out of the campaign. When I see a DM turn around and influence another player in the party into spearheading an attack against someone, I see a DM that has decided for themselves that they will never truly consider the feelings of their players. That even if the entire party has discussed ahead of time that they don't want to explore certain themes in their Gothic Horror themed campaign, that the DM will eventually violate that mutual trust without mercy or remorse. It also means that the crazy galah of a DM is using their concern for the player's mental health as a shield to deflect criticism, or worse, deflecting having to take any responsibility for their actions. And really, these DMs are the kind that will eventually create worse problems in the long run. Which brings us to a potential solution, that being to confront the DM as a group, instead of individual players, and explain to them why what they've done, and were probably prepared to do, would ultimately destroy the campaign. The best case scenario that I envision, you'd have to deal with a galah who is more than a little enthusiastic about gaslighting. However, if any group member is struggling with mental health issues, prioritize helping them get through their struggles, even if that means abandoning the campaign in question altogether. The plan B can always consist of, as a group, getting very far away from the problem players and founding a new group altogether. Thanks mates for watching the video. If you like my content and want to see more or wish to support the channel, please hit the subscribe button and maybe leave the video a like. It's free to do, and every bit of support is highly appreciated. Again, thanks for watching, and I shall see you all next time.